to say welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining this session today, which will be on the prayers of the previous Acaryas. And what we're looking to do in this series is go through the different prayers that Prabhupada has given us, distinctly the prayers which are the morning prayers, which I'm sure that practically all of you will be very familiar with, and to give some elaboration on those particular prayers as to their meaning, their significance, and to do this also for a specific purpose. One of the things that we find in Krishna consciousness, one of the challenges that every devotee will have, is the challenge of, the challenge of being mindful, the challenge of engaging in devotional service in such a way that one is conscious, one is aware in one's devotional service, and therefore is able to derive the real benefit from their devotional activities. So the idea is that this is some contribution to that process, and we'll explain how the understanding of these prayers helps us to be more conscious in our practice of devotional service. I thought I'd just take this opportunity also to introduce you to our deities, their lordships, so you can have darshan. And then what we will do is I'll just do this very briefly. Then what we will do is we will look at the meaning of the prayer, Guru-vandana, and we'll look at the translation and so on. Then I'm going to ask or hand the spotlight back to Balaram Nityananda, who will sing that Guru-vandana prayers before we discuss various aspects of this very sacred and very powerful prayer by Srila Narottam Das Thakur. Okay, I think you can see their lordship, so I need to make sure you can have darshan. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my screen so we can actually see the words of the prayer. So what I'm going to do is share my screen, and then we will look at the translation to the Guru-vandana prayers. We're going to sing the actual prayers in the original language in a moment. But first of all, and I'm going to hide my screen for this as well. First of all, we're going to look at the translation. And I wanted us to read this before we sing, because again, the whole process here is to be more mindful, more aware, and more conscious of these very sacred prayers, with the understanding that the more we can say these prayers with reverence and with full understanding or awareness of the meaning, then the same prayer will be much more powerful for each and every one of us. So I'll just read this and then we will hand over to Balaram Nityananda. But as I read this, feel free to either look at the words on the screen or feel free to just close your eyes and be in a meditative state. But the idea is to be conscious of the meaning of the prayer before we hear the prayer sung by Balaram Nityananda. Okay, it's a translation. The lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only way by which we can attain pure devotional service. I bow down to his lotus feet with great awe and reverence. By his grace, one can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. That's verse 1. Verse 2. My only wish is to have my consciousness purified by the words emanating from his lotus mouth. Attachment to his lotus feet is the perfection that fulfills all desires. Verse 3. He opens my darkened eyes and fills my heart with transcendental knowledge. He is my Lord, birth after birth. From him ecstatic prema emanates. By him ignorance is destroyed. The Vedic scriptures sing of his character. Our spiritual master is the ocean of mercy, the friend of the poor, and the Lord and master of the devotees. O Master, be merciful unto us. Give us the shade of your lotus feet. Your fame is spread all over the free worlds. We take shelter at your lotus feet. So I'm going to hand back over to Balaram Nityananda to sing the Guru-vandana prayers. We'll make sure everyone's muted because with Zoom, it doesn't work to have a call and response so well, but we're going to have him sing the prayers and we'll start to discuss the translation more and the meaning. Balaram Nityananda, I'm going to hand back over to you.
Shri Guru Charana Kevala Bhakti Sadma Mando Mui Savadana Mate Mando Mui Savadana Mate Jara Shadeva Deva Vadoniya Krishna Bhakti Hoy Krishna Bhakti Hoy Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chidit Goya Kya Arana Ko Asha Arana Kodi Asha Shri Guru Charane Adi Amagadi Jai Prashade Pure Sa Asha Jai Prashade Pure Sa Asha Shakudana Dilo Jamne Jamne Prabhu Se Shakudana Dilo Jamne Jamne Prabhu Se Dil Gyani De Progashito Dil Gyani De Progashito Prema Bhakti Jaha hoite avidya vinasha jane prema bhakti jaha hoite avidya vinasha jane virgai jahara charito virgai jahara charito Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Radha Janara Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Radha Janara Lokena Lokena Jivana Lokena Lokena Jivana Ha Prabhu Goro Daya De Hamare Padacharya Ha Prabhu Goro Daya De Hamare Padacharya Vejas Kushakti Bhavana Vejas Kushakti Bhavana Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Nitai Gora Haribo, Haribo, Gora Haribo. Jai Shri Prabhupada ki. Jai Nitai Gaur Premanandi. Hari Hari Bol.
So thank you very much, Balaram Nityananda, for singing the prayer. Let's just say Mangalacharya and then we'll go forward. Nagyanatamaranda Siyagyananjana Shilakaya Chakshum Militamina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Tvam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Virjana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jikatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sutta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchikapatrabhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktarinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So thank you, Balaram Nityananda. It was sung really, really devotionally. And thank you to all of you for joining the call today. So for those who just joined, so we're in this series, and it will be a series, we'll be going through the prayers of the previous Acaryas, in particular those which have been selected by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C., Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. And we will take this as an opportunity to collectively explore the prayers, what is being stated by the prayers, to draw upon some of the key points from the prayers, and with a very particular goal. We explained at the beginning of the class that in many areas of our spiritual lives, we're mechanical. And as a result of being mechanical, what happens is we do not derive the same transcendental benefit that we would otherwise from the same activities. And a root cause of mechanical devotional service is a lack of awareness or attention, and that is also related to a lack of understanding. So this point, actually, I heard in the class by my spiritual master, that there's a link between mechanical devotional service and a lack of understanding as to what one is doing. And we can understand this properly. We can understand this or confirm this in another way. I've been thinking over the past few months how devotional service, the whole process of devotional service, is what we call internally coherent. Okay, what do I mean by that? When you have a system which is internally coherent, you can confirm one part of the system by looking at another part of the system, right? So for example, in the Bhagavad Gita, there is a verse, I think it's chapter 14, text number 26. Let me just check if it's exactly this particular verse from the Bhagavad Gita. And I was in Dublin for work. I believe this was last year. And I went to the temple, and there was a devotee reading from the 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And it was really amazing, because as he was reading the verse in the purport, I could see how there was some interaction and connection between what Prabhupada has written in the purport and what is stated in the verse itself. It's not 1426. but it's a different verse in the 14th chapter. Let me see if I can find it. Anyway, I'll tell you what it says first of all. Maybe you can find it later on. I can give you the reference. But Krishna is speaking about how he's talking about the qualities of a transcendental person, okay? And he's saying that such a person does not hate certain qualities when they're present or long for them when they're not present. And then Prabhupada will elaborate on that in the purport in that particular verse in the 14th chapter. I wish I actually wrote down the reference because it's a really great chapter. But the reason why I found it to be so incredible, and I'll see if I can find it again, because if I can read it to you, you'll really understand what I'm talking about. I remember some of the words in that chapter. So illumination, let's put hate. Okay. So the particular verse in question is, so 14:22 to 25, I was one out. Okay, so let's just bring this up. So listen, I'll just read you the first part of this and I'll explain what I mean by internally coherent. So this is Bhagavad Gita, chapter 14. These are verses 22 to 25. So the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, O son of Pandu, he who does not hate illumination, attachment, and delusion when they are present, or long for them when they disappear. Okay, now illumination, attachment, and delusion, right? So Krishna is saying himself, one who doesn't hate them when they're present, or long for them when they disappear. I'm not going to read the rest of the verse, but I'll just go to some of the points in the purport. Let's see. I'll just go to some of the points in the purport. Okay, let me take this in a different direction. I'll make the point from the verse itself. You see, Prabhupada has been speaking about these modes of material nature. And when Krishna is speaking, you can understand how Prabhupada elaborates, because Krishna says not hating illumination, attachment, or delusion. Illumination is a representative of the mode of goodness, because goodness is synonymous with illumination. Attachment is a symbol of the mode of passion, okay? Because passion is the cause of attachment. And delusion is a symbol of the mode of ignorance. Because when one is in the mode of ignorance, one is deluded. So when Krishna is saying one who does not hate illumination, attachment, and delusion when they are present, or long for them when they disappear, what he's actually saying is one who is not averse, because hatred means aversion, when they're not averse to the mode of goodness, the mode of passion, and the mode of ignorance when they're present, and longing. One is not attached to them when they're not there. So Prabhupada, he actually writes in a purport, well, many purports, about being free of the modes of material nature. Not averse, not attached. A transcendentalist, he actually doesn't care about the mode of goodness. He's not attached to it. He's not averse to it. He's not attached to or averse to the mode of passion or ignorance. So you can look at the teachings in various ways, and you can confirm one thing by another if you are able to see deeply enough how the whole system works. Okay? And in a similar way, we can understand that if I do something with awareness and with knowledge, that brings that activity more into goodness. If it's done in goodness, what does Prabhupada say? One has to become conscious before they can become Krishna conscious. Translation, one has to reach the mode of goodness before they can become transcendental to the mode of goodness. And what does that mean for us as sadhakas? It means practicing devotional service in the mode of goodness. It means actually understanding what we're doing, consciously aware. Many of us will go to the temple. I mean, we haven't been for some time because of the current situation, but many of us for years, we'll have gone to the temple, we'll have attended the morning program, we'll have heard these prayers, and we just go through it. It's nice. there's some good music, you can dance a little bit, and then everything moves on. But in higher states of Krishna consciousness, when we are hearing these prayers, where there's actually an ensuing meditation. Many devotees in our spiritual journey to Krishna, we get stuck. And one of the reasons why we get stuck is that we don't go further on that internal journey. And one of the reasons why we do not go deeper in the internal journey is because our devotional life at a certain point may become mechanical, because we're doing something externally, but we don't understand the import and the significance. So what we're doing today is like a key. It means the next time that we spend half an hour, in that prayer, Guru-vandana, there'll be a lot more going on externally and inside of ourselves. And if we are reciting these prayers with the associated meditation and understanding, I guarantee you, and I mean that, I'm saying this in front of my deities, right? I've got Nishingadev deities. If I say anything wrong, I'm in trouble. I guarantee you, the next time you say these prayers with the associated understanding, you will see an acceleration. Many devotees, if they get stuck, they may think I'm doing so much, but Krishna consciousness is not just an activity. It is an activity with a consciousness. That's exactly what is stated in this famous verse that Prabhupada often recites. Anya bilasata shunyam jnana karma danavritam anukulena krishnanu shilanam bhakti uttama. Right? An activity, right? Done for the pleasure, done favorably for the pleasure of Krishna, free of the desires for karma and jnana. Okay, so we want to pick through this with now more awareness. And because these prayers have been given by Srila Prabhupada as our founder Acharya, if we state these prayers with that understanding, then there's so much potency. These prayers are given by Narottam Das Thakur, one of the great Acaryas in our line. These prayers have then been selected by Srila Prabhupada, who is our founder Acharya. We have two eternally liberated Nityasiddha, direct associates of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So if we can start to get into their prayers, their purpose, their mood, our spiritual life will become much deeper. We're very familiar with the external world, but we in Krishna consciousness are meant to become more and more familiar with the internal world. And it's incredible. If we do this properly, these personalities still exist. I know one devotee recently who was having a certain experience. And one of the experiences he was having is he was increasingly aware. He was increasingly aware of the presence of great devotees, unseen to him, but who are present, because of, their mercy primarily, and him trying to make some effort to be a devotee. And as we get into these prayers and into this meaning, we can open the door to far greater aspects of our inner world, our devotional world internally, where Krishna is present with his associates, with the previous acharyas. And then the one other thing I'll say before we look at the translation is that there are two things in our spiritual teachings. There is the tattva and there is the rasa, okay? So the tattva is that philosophical understanding. The rasa is the mood. We could say, it's got different translations, but we could say in this case is the mood. Now, tattva is considered to be masculine. Rasa is considered to be feminine, okay? Now, the rasa is that which gives the flavor. It gives the richness to everything. Tattva does also, but the rasa primarily. So when the great or pure devotees write these prayers, these prayers are the expressions of their own love and devotion. So just like you jumpstart a car, we can also trigger and try to invoke more of these great emotions, which literally give the flavor to our spiritual journey. This is another secret of spiritual life. You see some devotees and they really love being a devotee. They actually, I was going to say enjoy it, and I will use that word, but sometimes it's got a negative connotation. So let's use a better term. Let's say relish. There are some devotees, they absolutely relish Krishna consciousness, and that includes even the difficulties and the challenges. One of the reasons why they are able to relish Krishna consciousness, even in spite of or in line with the different challenges they're facing, is because they've imbibed a soundtrack. They've imbibed a certain kind of emotion, a certain kind of mood. And in some ways, it's almost romantic. It's like when you're in love. When you're in love, you have different challenges, but because you're in love, that emotion is superimposed upon your day-to-day experience. The emotion is superimposed upon your day-to-day experience. So I would like to encourage you in a few things. One is to learn the meaning of these prayers. Okay, as we go through it, in your own time, I'd encourage you to learn the meaning of the prayers. I'd encourage you to reflect on that meaning and bring this rasa, this mood of our previous acharyas more into your day-to-day life. Because what it will do, as I said, it'll be like a soundtrack to your spiritual journey. And it will change the very way in which we experience both the challenges and the successes in our spiritual life. Because those experiences are not in isolation. Whether it's a good experience or a challenging experience, it is always within the context or within the framing of our consciousness, our association, our mood, our experiences. We even see some devotees go through much greater challenges, but because they're within the context of a loving association of devotees, because they're in the association of loving mentors who encourage them, that same experience, it doesn't weigh on them. Whereas someone else going through less challenge, but then they feel alone, they don't feel encouragement, and therefore the lesser challenge is more of a burden for that particular individual. And so what we're trying to do is imbibe a certain mood, a certain rasa, and it's a principle. What I mean by principle is it's a universal law. We're going to do this in relation to Prabhupada's chosen selected verses from the previous acharyas. But we've all done this and do this consciously and unconsciously whenever we hear a good kirtan. Every one of us on this call, there'll be a certain kirtan that you hear, you've heard in the past, and it elicits a certain emotion. It allows you to really call out to Krishna with genuine feeling. I was speaking to one devotee recently. He messaged me actually, and he's having certain very deep spiritual realizations about his service to the Lord, let's say. And he said something very interesting when he messaged me. He said to me, because in order to cultivate that realization, one has to express it. And when I heard him say that, he sent me a WhatsApp message maybe 2 or 3 days ago. When I heard that part of his message, it hit me. And it started to make me understand, yeah, this is a universal law. In order to cultivate one's devotion to Krishna, it has to be expressed, right? It has to be expressed in a way that is deep, that is profound, and that is powerful. The more you give expression to that devotional aspiration, to that journey, to that realization, the more you express it, the more it becomes developed, the more it becomes churned, the more thick and deeply it becomes realized. And we do this in many ways. One way we do this, how do we cultivate or deepen our realization, is by expressing it through a class, right? How do we deepen our sense of being related to Krishna? It is through the medium of service, doing something practically for him. So I express it through service. How do we deepen our moods of devotion? This is one of the ways. Through having heart-moving kirtan, we churn, we deepen that mood of devotion, but also through expressing with understanding, expressing with understanding the prayers of the previous Acaryas, you develop these deep moods. The reason why the music industry is full of love songs is because it is the eternal state of the living entity to be in love with someone. This Sambhog, Vipralamba, so union, Sambhog, and Vipralamba, separation. You hear about this in the love songs. Why? Because it's a perverted reflection of our eternal state, right? That's why anything that's powerful in this world is some kind of reflection of the original eternal principle that exists in its pure form in our line of devotion. Okay, so that said, let's go through the meaning of the Sri Guru-vandana prayers, and then we'll see how we go, and then if we have some time, we may take some questions or hear some other comments. And again, this is not just a lecture to hear something. What I'd like you to do, at least to meditate as you're hearing, what does this mean for me? And if you want to make some notes, that's fine. What happens in spiritual life is it's just like the way that they train ninjas. One way that they will train ninjas is they will take them as young men into a school, and they would have them plant a seed in the ground, and then they would water it every day. And then having planted the seed and watering it on that day, they would jump over the seed many times. And every day they would water the seed and then jump over the seed many times. And what would happen is the seed would sprout and grow incrementally, right? The growth is so small, you would hardly notice it. It's incremental. If you look at it day by day, you see hardly any development. And they will jump over it. But even though every day you look at it, it's hardly any change. But over time, it grows, and it's just like the body. You have a young child, you look at her every day, she looks the same, but small incremental changes there. And then before you know it, that young child is a young adult. But you saw them every day, and one day to the other, you didn't see any major change. It was so tiny, so incremental. And our spiritual life works in the same way. If we reflect on these prayers and try to meditate, there'll be tiny incremental purification, incremental cleansing of the consciousness. But over the span of our spiritual life, that seemingly incremental change, you'll wake up and you'll think, I'm a completely different person to the individual who joined the movement, or to the individual who made the commitment to this journey of Krishna consciousness. So do not think that these processes do not have power. They have tremendous power if we take advantage of them. Okay, let's look at this first verse. The lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only way by which we can attain pure devotional service. I bow down to his lotus feet with great awe and reverence. By his grace, one can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. Let's just stop on this first one and let's deconstruct some of the statements here. The lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only way by which we can attain pure devotional service. This is an interesting first statement, because to be honest with you, I see that many of the devotees, perhaps most of the devotees in our movement, do not even know what our goal actually is. And there's a good reason for that, actually. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna talks about different levels of devotional service. And a careful study of the Bhagavad Gita will show this. At certain points, Krishna says, whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever sacrifices you make, do them for me. Okay, so at that stage, it's you do whatever you're going to do, but offer it to me. Okay, but as the Bhagavad Gita progresses, we come to the last instruction. And Prabhupada says the last instruction is the most important. What is the last instruction? Sarvadharman pratyajya, mamekam sharanam vraja, aham tvam sarva papebhyo, moksha yishyami masuchaha. He says, abandon all varieties of religion and surrender unto me. I shall protect you from all sinful reactions, do not fear. So there's a progression in spiritual life. We see this oftentimes when people come to the movement, and we may say this ourselves, just add Krishna, right? Just add the chanting. So you're doing whatever you want. You're living the way that you want to live. You're going about the activities that you want to go about, but add Krishna, okay? Now, that's true at a beginning level. But what happens? If we add Krishna properly, then we will get a taste, and if we understand what we're doing properly, we will want more of it. It's the same psychology behind selling a sample of something. You go to a supermarket, they give you a sample of some coffee or some shampoo, whatever it is, because if it's a good product and they give you a sample, they know that if it's a good product and you're intelligent, you will want more, okay? So the journey is from mixed devotional service to what is stated by Narottam Das Thakur here, pure devotional service. And only at the level of pure devotional service can we actually attain love for Krishna. In other words, mixed devotional service is not a means by which one can achieve prema. Until that mixed devotional service becomes pure devotional service, then by pure devotional service, we can achieve love of Godhead. So the lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only, very interesting word, exclusive, the only way by which we can attain pure devotional service. Why? Because it's a gift. It's a gift. When we go back to the spiritual world, technically what happens? If one attains to Krishna consciousness and one practices properly, you don't actually immediately go back to the spiritual world in terms of Goloka Vrindavan, right? Prabhupada very cleverly, he gave it the answer as a sutra. He says, back to Godhead. But it doesn't mean that you go back immediately to Goloka Vrindavan. What happens? Technically, what happens is if we achieve the goal in this lifetime, then in your next life, you will take birth in one of the material universes where Krishna and his associates are engaging in their pastimes. You will take birth in the womb of a gopi. And in that association of Krishna's pure associates, you will receive further training to develop that prema for the Lord. Okay? So we have the general understanding, and then there is the technical detail behind that general understanding. When one returns to the spiritual community, your spiritual master will be there also, but in a different form. That spiritual master will be in a different form. They will have their own eternal relationship. You will also have your own eternal relationship. And there'll be that mood of knowing, because there'll be that association. In fact, I heard it said in one class that in your eternal form, your spiritual master in his eternal form, he will introduce you into that community, into Krishna's community. So the lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only way by which we can attain pure devotional service. Another reason for this statement, another meaning behind this statement is example. One has to see the example. One has to learn how to execute pure devotional service by a living example. a living example of how one can engage one's consciousness, one's body, mind, words. Or let's say body, mind, intelligence, because words and intelligence are synonymous, right? In the loving service of the Lord. And then one also needs someone who's already dear to Krishna to advocate on our behalf. We're very lucky. In our line, we're not going back to Vaikuntha. Our line, the fact that Prabhupada is an eternal associate of Goloka Vrindavan means that because of that connection, and because of the connection with Lord Chaitanya, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we are being given the opportunity to go back to the most intimate place in the spiritual world. So technically there are 5 rasas, but actually as you read Chaitanya Charitamrita, it only mentions 4. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu does not mention Shantaras. He mentions just conjugal, parental, friendship, dasya. He doesn't even mention service in devotional service and neutrality. So it is because we are connected with someone from Goloka Vrindavan, that is the reason why we have the opportunity to go back to Goloka Vrindavan. That is actually how the whole process works. And it is by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, it is by the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Now, what does this do? This sentence and various prayers of our previous acharyas, they invoke different aspects of our process. So we have Sambandha, we have Abhideya, we have Prayojana. Sambandha has different meanings. We could say here, it means the knowledge, right? Sambandha Gyan, the knowledge of devotional service. Then we have the Abhideya, the devotional practices. Then we have Prayojana, which is the goal, okay? The lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only way by which we can attain pure devotional service. If you understand that the only hope to return to the pure state of Krishna consciousness is to please the spiritual master. If you understand that properly, what it does is it gives your devotional service focus. As long as I think I can do anything and everything, and it's all the same, and it's all going to give me the same result, you see that in devotees. There's a secret science in our teachings. You can understand something very significant about a person's consciousness by their conduct. When you see someone's devotional service is scattered, that indicates a lack of focus. A lack of focus means that there's no, the Sambandha Gyan has not intensified to the correct degree. Sambandha Gyan, it gives one the ability to be focused and also to be conscious in the choices that they make in devotional life. So conscious in the choices means a couple of things. One is I'm focused on the goal. 2 is I will ruthlessly avoid the things which will draw me away from the goal, and I'll ruthlessly make the choices which will take me towards the goal. So here, this is a very interesting statement, exclusive, the only way. I remember that, so this weekend is Tamal Krishna Goswami Maharaj's disappearance celebration. And it's a beautiful celebration. I know that Jagannath Sharon's involved and others. And I remember one pastime, and they mentioned this on the Friday evening. One devotee was speaking about Tamal Krishna. It was Giriraj Maharaj. So Giriraj Maharaj, he gave the initial address. And he was mentioning how Tamal Krishna Maharaj said to him that the secret of success in spiritual life is to please the Guru. And that's not a small statement. That's the secret. That's the secret. In first canto Bhagavatam, Prabhupada has explained that we can go back to Godhead on 3 bases, on the basis of 3 different areas. You have Nityasiddha, who goes back because in a sense they were never here. They come in and out of the material world on their mission, but they're not trapped. Nityasiddha. Second stage is Sadhana Siddha. They go back because they've perfected their devotional practice, and that's taken them to that level. Most of us enlist under the 3rd category. 3rd category is called Kripa Siddha. It's mercy, right? Kripa means mercy. So where is that mercy coming from? That Kripa Shakti is coming from the spiritual master and the association of devotees. So here, this last sentence, by his grace, one can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. Now, oftentimes we don't look at these statements very carefully, but there's two types of mercy here. And I want you to be very mindful. First of all, by his grace, so by the mercy of the spiritual master, one can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has explained in the Madhura Kadambini that Krishna gives his mercy to his devotees to distribute on his behalf. And that mercy, ladies and gentlemen, is unlimited. So when we say these prayers, please meditate on what you're saying. Look at the depth of this first verse. What you're praying, what we're praying, the prayer that Prabhupada has given us is to understand that our only way to attain pure devotional service is by pleasing our spiritual master. Now, this second sentence, I bow down to his lotus feet with great awe and reverence. This awe and reverence is to denote the sense of not becoming familiar. Familiarity breeds contempt. I was listening to something the other day. It was something on psychology. So I was going to integrate this into some presentation I was going to give. And they found that you can tell that the relationship is going to break up if the people in the relationship have contempt for one another, right? You know, sometimes you have this situation where people are around each other and someone says something, I was like, they roll their eyes up. When you see signs of contempt, obviously for devotees it's slightly different because hopefully we have a practice and a lifestyle that protects us from becoming in this over-familiar mindset. But when you see symptoms of contempt, it precedes the breakdown of that relationship. If they happen consistently and it's no longer situational, but it now becomes characteristic. What do I mean? It means it's not that I'm a little bit upset because I've just had a bad day, but rather now it's characteristic in that I have contempt for you. If that happens consistently, it becomes an issue. Prabhupada also writes this, I remember reading this about not having familiarity that leads to contempt. Therefore, we have this mood of the guru or the meditation on the guru. First, we bow down. Bowing down is because in the conditioned state, the mind follows the senses. So when Prabhupada was told by one of his disciples, I don't feel like bowing down to you, Prabhupada, to be honest. Prabhupada said, do it anyway, and eventually you'll feel like it. Because in the earlier states of spiritual life, the mind follows the senses or the body. In the advanced stages of spiritual life, the senses follow the mind. And throughout all stages of spiritual life, by spiritualizing the intelligence, we can get the mind and body to follow the intelligence because we know it's the right thing to do, whether we feel like doing it or not. Yeah, that's really important. But one thing I'll say on this also, this is a side point, but this is something I've been practicing and meditating on. Again, we're family, so I'll be very honest with you. I had a darshan with one of my main Shiksha gurus, Satyananda Maharaj. This was a few years ago. And we were speaking, and I had something that was going on internally, and I couldn't quite understand what was going on. Why is it I'm not as focused as I want to be? And it was a darshan that I had with him in Radhadesh. And he told me, and it was just completely like illuminated everything. He said to me, he said, Bhuta Bhavana, he said, what your mind is telling you is that it needs a break. He told me that. You know, he said, what your mind is telling you is that it needs a break. And what I started to, and it took me a while to really understand it. What I started to see is that I could get my mind to cooperate if I also gave it a bit of room. Because for many years, I just pushed my mind. It's like, you're going to do what I tell you. You're going to do what I tell you when I tell you, and just push it. And then it kind of created a bit of an issue because my mind was just like, it's like pulling the reins on too tight. And so then my wife, who's initiated by Satyananda Maharaj, she heard a class where he spoke about this point and he elaborated on it. So he was explaining how the mind, you can consider it like a horse. If you give it a little bit of room to maneuver sometimes, then it won't kick up too much of a fuss and it will generally go along with you. But if you're always pushing it, and do not give it any room to maneuver, if you don't give it any kind of space, then it rebels strongly. You know, and I know that some of you on this call will have experienced this, where it's kind of like you've been practicing strongly, determinedly, and after a point, your mind's like, no, I'm not going to do it anymore. I've had enough. And you know, you wanted to do something, but it really is just not cooperating with you. And it's like, what is going on here? How? And this is one of the reasons. And when I started to study, based upon what Maharaj told me, when I started to study the teachings, and this is why, again, association of advanced devotees is so important, because they can give you very deep insight into the same thing that you've read and heard, but may have not understood as profoundly as before. You know? So anyway, that point about the mind. So I started to see that this point connects with what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, a balance between work and recreation. So all Krishna conscious, but Krishna conscious service, Krishna conscious recreation. Krishna, you know, and recreation could even be you're just absorbed in a very good kirtan, right? It doesn't have to be outside the purview of the practice. So I really want to encourage you. This is another point related to this. Try to see what is the balance of Krishna conscious activities that you need to be inspired and move forward. And if you find that your mind is really stubbornly just not doing what you want it to do, then ask yourself, what does the mind need? I had a groundbreaking conversation with one devotee. I mean, it was incredible. The beginning of this week, and just some realizations just really came through about, so what we did is we actually started to explore, okay, let's look at it subjectively. What does our mind need? And again, linking back to my association with my other spiritual Shiksha gurus. So it was Slovenia, I believe, with Chandramoli Maharaj. So we were there for his disciples retreat. And at the end of the disciples retreat, I went to see him and just paid the obeisances before we left. And I said to him, Maharaj, is there any last instruction for me? And he said to me, yes. He said, Bhuta Bhavana. Then he started telling me about how my mind works. He said, your mind works like this. He said, so therefore, you always need to find new and fresh ways to present Krishna consciousness. And it's true. The way my mind works, I can't just do things the same way all the time. I need to find what's a new, fresh angle, a new, fresh realization. What is some new way of presenting the teachings to make it accessible, attractive, interesting? What's some new kind of preaching that we can do? You know? And Sachinam Maharaj, he told me that, Chandramoli Maharaj, he told me that just before I left his disciples retreat. And I understood, and that's one of the things that came up in the conversation I had earlier this week, is that when I find new and innovative ways to spread Krishna consciousness, my mind's like, okay, I like that, we're satisfied, and then it will cooperate. But if I'm just doing the same thing, giving the same realization, the same way that everyone else does, my mind's like, no, I'm not happy about this. I want something new. I want something fresh, new realization. So what I did is I recorded the conversation that I had with this devotee at the beginning of the week, and I'm in the process of writing out, listing two things, so two columns. On one side, what my mind needs in Krishna consciousness, not outside of it, okay, in Krishna consciousness. And when I say need, I don't mean what other people have to do for me. It's how I practice Krishna consciousness in a way that is as absorbing and as deep as possible. So I'm writing down the things that I should do for the mind. Okay, write more, right? So write notes, realizations, do that. Find new ways to present the teachings. Okay, be in kirtan more. Spend more time in kirtan. And then in the other column, I'm writing the things that the mind distinctly finds difficult. Now, that second list doesn't mean that it can't be done. But there's a very interesting balance. When you give the mind what it needs sufficiently, then it will do even the things it doesn't like doing. Just like the horse, when you give it sufficient rein in Krishna consciousness, then it will allow you to hear better. It won't run away when you're trying to hear class. It will allow you to chant better. It won't be like, you force me to focus all day. I'm sick of it. I'm not going to pay attention when you're chanting. You see? So this is really important. Anyway, that's an aside, actually. But those are some reflections on the first verse of this Guru-vandana. Second verse. My only wish is to have my consciousness purified by the words emanating from his lotus mouth. Now, this second verse is significant because this is not how we feel. My only wish is to have my consciousness purified by the words emanating from his lotus mouth. Usually, that's not our only wish. Usually, we have a whole range of other desires. And actually, let's be honest, actually, we like listening to the guru when he says something that supports whatever we want to do. But when he starts to say something that cuts our maya, then it becomes difficult. Then oftentimes the guru becomes an enemy. Right? And when we say guru, it can also mean other devotees as well. But if we keep hearing, what happens? If we keep hearing, that sound vibration has a potency. Right? It really is like that. The words spoken by a pure devotee, the sound vibration is different. And we said this in a previous class. I know that we have different people on here, so I'll just recap. In a previous Sangha, we spoke about 4 levels of sound. Yep. And some of you will remember. So there was sound at the level of the body, Vaikari Vak, which is sound at the level of the body. So when we chant Hare Krishna just with our lips, but the rest of us is doing something else, that's Vaikari Vak. Then we said there's sound at the level of the mind, Madhyama Vak. Okay? That when you chant at the level of Nishta, that's called Madhyama Vak. Because at Nishta, the name has penetrated and resides in the mind, as well as on the lips. Then at the level, I think it's Ashakti, Ruchi Ashakti, you have what's called Pasyanti Vak. Okay, that's an even higher level. And then when we are fully realized, when we're pure, then the chanting takes place at the level of the soul. And that's called Paravak. So when Prabhupada is chanting, when Prabhupada is giving class, when pure devotees are doing so, their speech is of a different quality of sound vibration. Okay, if anyone would like to learn more about this, I'd encourage you to listen to Bhakti Vigyan's seminar on this topic called Liberation Through Sound. Yeah, it's one of the best lectures I've ever heard. Liberation Through Sound by Bhakti Vigyan Maharaj. Anyway, he goes into these 4 levels of sound. But just to this point here, so if we hear the words, there's 2 ways. When we read the books of Prabhupada, those words are his realization. So they have an independent power. Now, if we hear the words of pure devotees, again, the words, the sound vibration carries their realization. It is actually what you could call holographic, meaning that you are able to perceive one dimension of it, but it carries many other dimensions that are not perceivable. But even though those other dimensions are not perceived, those other dimensions still act. So, what is the action? The action is this: purification. When we hear and hear submissively, when we hear submissively the words emanating from the mouth of the spiritual master, and we have many types of guru: Diksha Guru, Shiksha Guru. That means when we hear from advanced devotees with the right attitude, we're becoming purified. Okay? And that's how we make the journey forward. So one of the easiest ways in which you can become purified is hear more. And along with hearing, hear with the correct attitude. If you hear with a challenging attitude, you can't get any progress. You know, because the mood is wrong. You have to hear with the correct attitude. There's a subtle barrier between the ears and the heart. The subtle barrier between the ear and the heart is called submission. Okay? If you hear submissively, it goes from the ear to the heart. If you hear with the wrong attitude, then you will hear as much as the other person, but their progress will be much stronger than ours. Because one heard with the correct attitude, one heard with the wrong attitude. Now, one subtle barrier to it going into the heart is also understanding. Now, that doesn't contradict being submissive, but Prabhupada talks about this in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, text number 34, in the purport to the verse, Tadvidi prepratena preprasnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tatvadashinaha. Right? So he says, absurd inquiries and blind following, both of them are to be condemned. So what does this mean? It means submissively trying to understand the truth. The modern culture we live in is a problem. One of the reasons why it's a problem is because people don't live like this. Many of us, we have attachments. That's the real issue with attachments, actually. The real problem with having an attachment is that it causes you to have a distorted vision of reality. I want to believe this person's inferior. So therefore, I don't hear what they actually say. I hear looking for the faults so I can reject it. So then anything they have that's useful, I will miss it. So it's being presented to me, but because of my own envy and attachment, I can't, what's the word? I can't take benefit from it. So that's one extreme. The other extreme is that I blindly accept whatever I'm told, even though it's not properly in line with the teachings. So how do you discriminate between the two things? It requires a certain qualification on our part that comes by doing the work to try to understand. So there's two levels of qualification. I'm going to read this to you because I sent this to my mentees recently. And it was a quote from Prabhupada that I came across on Mother Chintamani, Chintamani Dham, who's the wife of Krishna Dharma. So they like to really discuss and churn Prabhupada's teachings. So I'll just read you what Prabhupada said, because Prabhupada was asked about being cheated by fake gurus. And Prabhupada's response was, and this is in chapter 2 from Science of Self-Realization, Prabhupada says, to come to Krishna consciousness, you must be either very fortunate or well aware of this science. You see? So there's two sides. One is sincerity, the other is intelligence. So the sincerity side is, I really want to know the truth and to live the truth. I really want to do what Krishna wants. I really want to live in a way that I become pure. So there's real sincerity. It's not like I want to have a nice time in spiritual life. I want to enjoy myself in spiritual life. I want people to worship me in spiritual life. I want to have name and fame in spiritual life. If you have the wrong desire, because the desire is a cheating desire, we'll be cheated. So one side is having the right intention, sankalpa. And then the other side, which is linked, by the way, the other side is being well aware of the science. Because if I really want to do things properly, one of the things that Krishna will do is he'll encourage you to learn the science. He'll encourage you to inquire properly. He'll inquire you to inquire submissively with a real willingness to hear the truth, even if it's unpalatable, and to follow it. So it's a question of intention, and the intention also links to knowledge. You see, some devotees think, I'm not philosophical, I don't need to worry about all that reading and stuff, I'll just chant Hare Krishna. And there's some devotees who think, I'm a real devotee, I read the books, I'm a great scholar, I know everything. Both of them are wrong. Both of them are wrong. The process is like an ecosystem. Every part of the process is interconnected with every other part of the process. Someone who chants the holy names of the Lord sincerely, they will develop a taste to understand Krishna consciousness properly, which means that they will hear and read. If they chant sincerely, there's no question of them not developing a taste to hear and read about Krishna and the science, if they chant sincerely. And someone who hears and reads sincerely, if they do it sincerely, they'll develop a taste for chanting. It's not one side or the other. They may have a preference just because of their conditioning, but they will undoubtedly respect and sufficiently appreciate all aspects. So someone who's like, I just chant, I don't bother about reading. Yeah, this philosophy, I'm not philosophical, you don't, Prabhupada said, watch out for karma and Gyan Prabhu. All that nonsense, that means that it's a person who's not following the process with the sufficient depth. Because it's like a collaboration. The hearing, the chanting supports everything else. They support each other. Okay, and that hearing allows us to become purified. Prabhupada writes in one place, hearing is even more important than reading. He actually does say that, because hearing the words, the sound vibration of pure devotees, it actually has a stimulating effect on the soul. We may not be conscious of the effect, but it has a stimulating effect on the soul. Okay, next statement. Attachment to his lotus feet is the perfection that fulfills all desires. Now, this is really important. Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita says, Maya sakta manapata, asakta mana, with the mind attached to me. I was thinking about how devotees choose their spiritual master. There's two dimensions to choosing a guru. One is you're looking for someone who's pure. Okay, they should be Krishna conscious, deeply Krishna conscious. That's one side. But the second factor is you're looking for someone who's pure, but who can present the you're looking for someone who's pure and can present the teachings in a way that you're inspired to follow. You see? So it's not just that they're pure, but you can't follow. That's useless. It's not just that you can follow because you like the way that they speak, but there's got no purity. That's also not so good. You see? You're looking for someone who's pure, but who presents the teachings in a way that you can actually follow. Because we're personalists. That's the point. We're personalists. And this is all done within the community of devotees. So the day after I got initiated, my spiritual master spoke to us and he said, your relationship with your spiritual master is like the relationship with a father. It's a special relationship. He said at the same time, there are certain things that we can learn better from our aunts and uncles than we can from our own father. This is the healthy understanding of Krishna consciousness. I see some devotees and I'm like, this is absolutely crazy. They have a mood where it's just about their guru, right? And that is so dangerous and disrespectful. Why? Dangerous because what happens when your guru leaves? Which will inevitably happen. What happens? What do you do then? What happens when your guru is not in the same country or is not so accessible, whether it's by email or other means? What do you do then? Because you made it all about one person. No, it's about the community of devotees. You have your father, it is special. That is directly stated by the Shastra, but in what way? It's special because he's taking the most responsibility. If we're impersonal, we say it's all one. Yeah, my mentor's taking responsibility, this person taking responsibility, so they're all the same. No, your guru's taking more responsibility. Therefore, he gets additional respect. But it doesn't mean that everyone else who's also helping you is not respected. Because you love your father, it doesn't mean that you disrespect your aunts and your uncles and you take no advice from them. If you love your father, actually, and you're mature, it would automatically spill over into your conduct and your shelter of your aunts and uncles. And the same thing can apply to mentoring, right? A good mentor will encourage his mentees to be part of the community, to take guidance within the community, because people have their areas of expertise. Now, of course, he still takes more responsibility because he's taken a certain service on. But what he's meant to do is encourage them to be part of the community and to encourage them to be deep in understanding the teachings so that they can make proper discrimination when they are taking advice, and they can properly weigh up the advice and properly understand, okay, this person has got a lot of realization in this area. You know, this person has a lot of realization in a different area. And you'll see this in Chaitanya. No, you'll see this in Prabhupada Lilamrita. Prabhupada in the early days, he would send his disciples to learn different aspects of devotional service from different God brothers who were especially empowered in that particular area. That started to change when they started to be envious of Prabhupada and started to criticize him to his own disciples. And he saw this is not going to work. But at least in the early days, that was there. So attachment has to be there. That attachment actually comes through rendering devotional service properly. If we pray for attachment, if we develop a mood of service, you will start to understand what's being given and you'll start to become more and more attached. I mean, I'm just going to even tell you, our process is incredibly powerful. I had an incredible conversation with one devotee, I think it was maybe a month ago, and they were having such incredible realizations about their spiritual master, and they told their spiritual master, and this is the point, attachment to his lotus feet is the perfection that fulfills all desires, because Guru is with Krishna. He's a representative of Krishna. So if you're attached to Guru, you're automatically attached to Krishna. I had this vision, and I'll just share it with you, in terms of keeping Krishna in the center. So I had this vision. So I imagined that you had Krishna in the center of the room, and then walking around Krishna, circumambulating around Krishna, let's say was Prabhupada, or let's say the previous Acaryas. So let's say Prabhupada and the previous Acaryas. So Krishna is in the center of the room. You have Prabhupada and the previous Acaryas. They're walking around Krishna, okay, who's in the center of the room with his flute. Now, this is where we come in. Then you have Prabhupada's followers. So who are we walking around? We're not walking around Krishna directly. While Prabhupada is walking around Krishna, we're walking around Prabhupada. You see? While Prabhupada is walking around Krishna, we are walking around Prabhupada. But because Prabhupada is walking around Krishna and we're walking around Prabhupada, by association with Prabhupada, we're also circumambulating Krishna. So by putting Guru in the center, we also automatically put Krishna in the center, and that same spiritual master is connecting us with the Lord. When one is connected with Krishna, they actually have access to everything, because Krishna is the source of everything. And that's how it works. That's how it works. We're introduced to the Lord through the medium of the spiritual master. So by pleasing him, Krishna is also pleased. Okay, let's move on. He opens my darkened eyes and fills my heart with transcendental knowledge. He is my Lord birth after birth. From him ecstatic prema emanates. By him ignorance is destroyed. The Vedic scriptures sing of his character. I'll make just a few quick comments on these last two, then we'll open up because I'm also conscious of our time. So I'll make one statement from this third verse. You see, this ignorance is very deep within all of us. The truth of the matter is, it's due to ignorance that we're attached to the material world. We all want to be happy, and we all more or less understand philosophically that if you're attached to material things, you're going to suffer. But we find that we can't seem to let go of the attachment. We have a mind and we have a body which oftentimes does not do what we know we should do. So I know I should do this, but my mind and body want to do something else, and we end up doing something else. This is ignorance. Unless we remove the ignorance by the mercy, by the teachings of Guru, by the example of Guru, then we can actually move in the right direction. And therefore, the Vedic scriptures sing of his character. Because again, we need the example. We need to see that example. And he's more merciful than the Lord. He's not different from the Lord in some respects. In another respect, he's more merciful than the Lord. Why? There's a reason for Prabhupada's humanness. People don't like this sometimes. They think that the pure devotee is just a person who's got no emotions, no feelings. He's just in ecstasy all the time. There's truth in the fact that he's in that state of ecstasy. but he goes through seemingly human experiences to make him more relatable to us, right? So what do we see? Prabhupada, he wanted to do his business failed, right? Prabhupada, he wanted to marry a woman who was more attractive to him. And but his father said, no, marry this other person. So many different factors to make him more relatable. So he could draw us in, but with his own kindness, his own affection, to give us a taste of how much kindness and affection the Supreme Personality of God must have in order to help us to really come closer to him. Okay, last verse. Our spiritual master is the ocean of mercy, the friend of the poor and the Lord and master of the devotees. O Master, be merciful unto me, or us, give us the shade of your lotus feet. Your fame is spread all over the three worlds. We take shelter at your lotus feet. So, excuse me. Because the Guru is delivering the living entities on behalf of the Lord, he's doing the Lord's own work. This Krishna consciousness movement is an extension of the mission of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, and therefore, the devotees in our spiritual community, those who are engaged in the mission, are engaged in Gaura Leela. This mission of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the mission of Srila Prabhupada, which is itself an extension of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's own pastimes. Okay, so I think this is a good point to stop. But just to reiterate, this prayer, when we recite these prayers, if we can recite them with the understanding, even a little bit, and the mood, there's a mood behind all this, the mood of humility, the mood of dependence, the mood of reverence, right? The mood of a focused understanding. If we can start to recite these prayers with understanding and imbibe the mood, you will find your spiritual life will actually be more joyful. You'll be happier in your spiritual life. What defines how happy a person is in their spiritual life? The more that your behavior aligns with the nature of the soul, that determines how happy you are in life, in spiritual life. The more your behavior goes contrary to the nature of the soul, Jivara Sarupoy Krishnera Nityadas, the more you will find yourself unhappy. The more we will find ourselves unhappy. So we can take this on a philosophical level, but we can take this even deeper in terms of the mood. This is Narottam Das Thakur's mood, his bhakti, the devotion, the feeling he has in recognition of the mercy of his spiritual master. His spiritual master was Lokanath Goswami. So this kind of mood, if we imbibe it, and there's many prayers like this, and if we sing this with understanding, if we pray these prayers with understanding, we will be empowered. Okay, so I will stop there. And if anyone has any questions or comments, they can feel free to raise their hand. And then those who are controlling things, they can actually, they can coordinate as necessary so that they can speak. So maybe we can have Balaram Nityananda. If you could unmute if you have a question or comment. I've just sent you a request to unmute. Okay, yes.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, first of all, thank you so much for such an inspiring class today. It's really been the highlight of my week. So thank you. I had a question with regards to developing love and faith for the spiritual master, and especially Srila Prabhupada, our grand spiritual master. Mostly everything in Krishna consciousness is really favorable and really helps us to strengthen that connection. But here and there we read statements or we see arguments with the authorities that really decrease our faith. Mm-hmm. So how can we balance those things out so that we get back on track?
That's a very, very good question. So first of all, thank you for asking that. Strangely enough, I've been thinking about a related topic actually quite a lot recently. I've had conversations with devotees over the years, and it even happened earlier this year. And sometimes devotees, I had a conversation with one devotee in particular, I think it's about a week ago. And it's interesting. They were talking about how, sometimes devotees get too much into a certain type of preaching, and then suddenly everyone wants to be, let's say, famous or whatever. And they were talking about that, and there's some truth to that. And then sometimes I had conversations with devotees like, devotees, they're all in-house, and I prefer it, but we should reach out to the people, and we've got to say it in their language, and they're also correct. And as I was meditating over the years, I'll be honest, I feel a very clear realization about the answer to this. You see, the trouble is that we're impersonal, and the fact that we're impersonal, it leads to certain kinds of issues. One of the issues that it leads to is that we still keep ourselves in the center of the universe, and it's unconscious. Now, the result of it is that because I'm impersonal, I think that whatever inspires me, everyone else should do it, right? And I assume that when they're doing something different, that there's something wrong with them, due primarily to my immaturity. But as I become more mature in spiritual life, something changes. When I become more mature in spiritual life, it becomes very clear that every single devotee is meant to do what they're meant to do for Krishna. In other words, Krishna has a specific requirement of each and every one of us, and it's not the same. It simply is not the same. There are some devotees, they're meant to do something where they've got a nature, an empowerment, a certain kind of understanding, a certain level of maturity. So it's these things, nature, empowerment, understanding, and maturity that qualifies themselves. Let's say, for example, Radha Maharaj, he's like our spiritual ambassador because he can present the teachings in a way that is quite broad and accessible to a vast number of people, right? So then if he does that, that's not Maya for him to do that. Now that same service for someone else may be Maya actually, because for someone else who does not have the necessary qualification, that kind of stuff may cause them to have to misrepresent the teachings. So to say that I can't do it, therefore no one else should do it, that's immature. Now, related directly to your question, Balaram, devotees can disagree because actually what they're saying can both be correct. Both of those things can be correct because also sometimes different leaders or even sometimes different gurus will attract a different cohort of living entities. And therefore, for the living entities who they attract, they have to preach a certain way because that preaching will work for this group of people. Now, another guru may attract a different cohort of living entities, and they need Christian consciousness presented to them in a different way in order for them to make progress. I can't remember if it was Jiva Goswami. One of the Goswamis, he wrote that Swakya Ras is highest, right? So we know that the rasa, the highest ras, where one is in the mood of a lover with the Lord, there's different subcategories within that. One is wedded love, and the other is unwedded love. Now, we know that in the absolute sense, unwedded love is superior, is higher, okay? And this, of course, this is purely on the transcendental platform. It has nothing to do with mundane. In the mundane platform, unwedded love is considered to be the lowest, okay? Let's be very clear on that. But I'm talking now purely on the transcendental platform, meaning at the platform of those in the eternal spiritual realm, not those on this earth planet. Okay, so I believe it was Jiva Goswami, he told his followers that wedded love was higher. And the reason why he said it is because he knew the adhikar of his followers was such that if he told them that unwedded love was higher, they would not understand it properly. They may even think that Krishna is immoral because they wouldn't understand, no, Krishna's transcendental, so he is above the morals and the ethics of this mundane world. You see? So when we have a deeper understanding, we can appreciate there are so many different nuances. And when devotees are advanced and mature, they can disagree. But they can disagree respectfully, and we can have an honest conversation, and we can figure out what will ultimately be best. There's two types of disagreement. One type is acceptable, and the other type is unacceptable. The acceptable disagreement is where where you have a view that is supported by Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, but the disagreement, right? So if it's accepted by Guru, Sadhu, Shastra, that's acceptable, okay? Now the disagreement when it's accepted by Guru, Sadhu, Shastra is not whether what you're saying has some precedent in our teachings, but how and to what degree and if it's applicable now. You see? That's where it becomes a thing. So you can have a situation where, and I saw this, where different advanced devotees are arguing against each other, and they're both able to give evidence according to Guru, Sadhu, Shastra. You see? So there's some substance to what they're saying. Why are they disagreeing? Their disagreement isn't about Sambandha Gyan. It's not about the teachings. Their disagreement is about the application of the teachings according to time, place, and circumstance. That type of disagreement is completely acceptable as long as they're mature and respectful towards each other, even while they have a different view. Where disagreements become an issue is where people are offensive, or where what they're saying is not actually, it does not have any precedent or any root in terms of the teachings. Okay? So that's how we see it. So you can be right and still be wrong. Someone can have a disagreement with another person. They can have some shastric or Guru Sadhu shastric basis for thinking or feeling strongly in a certain way, but they're just so rude, insulting, belittling, dismissive, mistreating of another person, and therefore that's an offense, even though their view may actually be correct. So there's two factors, philosophical and conduct. Now, what we should do is look at the essence, okay? This requires some faith. When there's faith, there's less fear. Faith and fear are on two different ends of the spectrum. The more someone has faith, the less fearful they become, actually. Because faith is actually confidence. But confidence for us is confidence in Krishna. So when we have more faith, then when we see people disagreeing, it doesn't damage our faith, because we can understand that there are often more than one answer. I saw a post, I think it was on Facebook. One of my, one friend of mine, he had a post from Prabhupada, where Prabhupada was stating about how one cannot institute Varnashram in modern society. And it's a direct quote from Prabhupada. And I thought, that's really nice. I thought it was really nice because I completely disagree with the point that he was making. But I know why he's making it. Because I heard this lecture by Sureshwara Prabhu, Prabhupada, our founder Acharya, where Sureshwara Prabhu goes through a timeline of explaining Prabhupada's different statements about Varnashram. And I can understand that the person who's quoting Prabhupada saying Varnashram isn't possible, he's very sincere. He doesn't know that Prabhupada gave different emphasis at different times while he was on the earth. So in the early stages, Prabhupada said you can't institute Varnashram, and he's put that quote, and he's very well-intentioned, and it's a direct quote. So if I didn't know any better, I'll be like, that's correct. It's only because I've heard from my gurus, plural, many gurus. My spiritual master spoke about this. Prabhupada's disciple Sureshwara Prabhu spoke about this. I think Shiv Ramaraj spoke about this. Because I've heard from my spiritual masters, I know that Prabhupada may have emphasized one thing in earlier stages of his time in Krishna consciousness, and he may have emphasized completely the opposite thing as time went through. But if you don't know that nuance, you may latch, and I see this with many devotees who aren't aware of the teachings in their entirety, they can latch onto one quote, and they think that they've got it. Then when they hear someone saying the opposite, they think you're wrong. I've got a quote. Look, Prabhupada said this, but they don't know that Prabhupada said this, and he said what the other person is saying as well. In fact, you can take it even further. You will find there's two different quotes. One of them is in Chaitanya Charitamrita. The other is in the Srimad Bhagavatam. In one of the literatures, Prabhupada talks about how polygamy is acceptable. And in the other literature, Prabhupada says polygamy is unacceptable. You know, what happened was Prabhupada wrote polygamy is acceptable. Then Prabhupada's disciples told him, said, Prabhupada, in the West, may not happen like this in India, but in the West, if you tell people that if you become a devotee, the men can marry more than one woman, they said to Prabhupada, Prabhupada, men will join the movement because they think that by joining the movement, they can enjoy with more than one woman. They told Prabhupada that. And therefore, Prabhupada changed his stance on polygamy, you see? But you will find both quotes in different places in Prabhupada's teachings. So what the conclusion is the following. We have to come to the Madhyam platform. When you're a Madhyam, then you actually have a thorough understanding of the teachings. It's basically, when we're Kanishtas, then our understanding of the teaching is one-dimensional, it's flat. So you've read things and you think it's all on the same level. When we become Madhyams, our understanding of Prabhupada's teachings becomes three-dimensional. We know what Prabhupada said and we can rank the different statements. So Prabhupada said this, this, and this is more important, this is secondary, this is tertiary. They're all said by Prabhupada, but you can actually start to see what to prioritize, what's secondary and what's tertiary, and you can explain it clearly as well. But it requires one to have a very broad and vast understanding of the teachings, but that comes through many years of study, learning, asking questions, understanding the context. Why did Prabhupada, Prabhupada said that at that time, and then he saw this, therefore this later literature, because the literatures have a chronology, so Prabhupada wrote this earlier, later on he wrote that, and that's why this teaching said this, because at this time, this is what was happening in the mission, in the movement. But yeah, it takes some time to learn that. So another conclusion is when we're not sure, we should ask, but we should respect devotees when they have different views. We should try to understand why they have different views, and whatever we do, we should always maintain and encourage them to maintain the proper behavior, even if they're taking different stances. So we can disagree respectfully, and when there's more realization, things become clearer. Sometimes we disagree, but actually, if we discuss properly, someone could say, okay, I know you disagree, right? But actually, if you look at those different statements, all of which have different views from Prabhupada, the reason why this is the actual correct answer and these are secondary and tertiary is because of this. You can give a logic. I had one devotee, one of my mentees, I told my mentees these quotes from Prabhupada about the age difference between men and women in marriage. And one of my mentees found some other quotes from Prabhupada, and he was very respectful. I really appreciate it. He wrote to me and said, but Prabhupada has also said this, right? Because there's some quotes from Prabhupada saying, you know, if in your environment there are these differences, you can maybe minimize the age difference. It's not so important. And I said to him, that's true. But if you look at it, there's also, so this is by Jiva Goswami. Jiva Goswami in the Tattva Sandarbha, he gives 10 what we call praman. Praman means evidence. And there's 3 which are primary. There's a great lecture on this, and you can find this online. There's a lecture, I have to say it's one of the best lectures I've ever heard. The lecture is called Logic and the Bhagavatam, and the lecture is by Hridayananda Goswami. Now he talks about these points. Now he says the same thing that Jiva Goswami says. There's 10 types of evidence. 3 of them are particularly used by Vaishnavas. So they are Shabda, that's the direct teachings, direct statements of the scripture. Anuman, Anuman means inference or logic. And the third one is Pratyaksha. Pratyaksha means direct perception. Pratyaksha also means empirical evidence, right? Now, what I was explaining to my mentee is that yes, Prabhupada did say different things, but now, so that means all of these different things are stated in scripture, Shabda, okay? So we know that they're all rooted in our teachings. That's number 1. I said, but if you look at the next point, Anuman, inference, if you infer, if you use logic, then the fact that most of us have not been brought up in a Vedic environment, if you look at it and if you see that most of us are brought up in an environment which is very heavily influenced by Western culture, which is anti-authoritarian, then therefore, if we take that evidence in scripture plus these other things, which Prabhupada has also said, the Western culture, they don't really want to accept authority, etc. And we know this, and no one has to be a genius to work this out. Then what's the inference? Okay, what does that infer? Does it infer that it's more important that you marry someone who can look up to you, or does it infer that it's less important, therefore it doesn't matter? You see? And it was very clear. Yeah, if you see, even in Vedic times, this was advised that people could have a harmonious relationship, right? Because then they can hear from each other. The husband and wife can have that relationship. So therefore, if that was advised in the Vedic culture where respect for authority was already there, then we can understand or infer that in the Western culture where there's even less respect for authority, or let's say no respect for authority, it becomes even more important. You see? So there are ways there are internal mechanisms within our teachings to know how to weigh up those different statements and to think in this context, what is primary, what is secondary, what is tertiary, and why. And one can make a coherent and clear explanation about why some things are more important, some things are less important. You see? So that's how we can look at these things. So the key point is not to get into a disrespectful behavior, but to understand that sometimes different people disagree because they're taking various aspects of the teaching. They may disagree about how it's applied, but this is also one last factor. People may also disagree because of their eternal relationship with Krishna. That's actually true. Sometimes you may have different devotees in this world and they disagree on something because they have different rasas and a different type of relationship with Krishna in the spiritual world. They may even be in different camps. I know it sounds esoteric, but it's true. They may even be in different camps, different groups in the spiritual world. And for that reason, some of that different camps, some of the gopis are conservative, some are more liberal, right? And just for that reason, they may not even be fully aware of why they're disagreeing. But on this earth level, that can also play into some of the different stances they take in regards to different factors. It's a bit of a broad answer, but does that give you something to think about, Balaram Prabhu? Let me just see. I'm going to just ask you to unmute. Okay, that was good. Thank you. Then I'll go to Shama Sundar, and you can unmute, and then I'll go to Sudhira Nitai.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you so much. This is a really nice opportunity to hear you speak. My question was just based on a statement you made earlier, so I'm just going to check that I caught the statement first. I believe the statement was, I do, so it was in terms of service and the fact that we should do our service and follow the instruction of the spiritual master to please the spiritual master to go back to Goloka Vrindavan. Is that correct?
Yes, there's many different things to that. Yes, Dylan is correct. I'm just going to add, it's not done at the cost of being part of the community and the service in the community. But yes, we try to please the spiritual master. That is the secret of success. And Prabhupada stated that. When he read the commentary, I think it was Baladev Vidyabhushan, but my memory is a little bit vague on that. But that point was made in the one commentary by the previous Acaryas about making the order of the spiritual master one's life and soul. And that gave Prabhupada the clue to actually how to achieve the mission of the Lord on behalf of his guru. Yes, so that point is correct. Yes, what's your question, Shamasundar?
So to that point then, in that case then, when serving the spiritual master, when trying to please the spiritual master, should our motive be to please the spiritual master because of our genuine love and appreciation for them and their role, or because of the motive, or essentially what they help us with? So I don't know how to articulate this. So the fact that because we're pleasing them, then we will be able to go back to Goloka Vrindavan. So what would the motive be? To serve the spiritual master, to please them because I have genuine love and appreciation for them, or because in the long term, they will help me get back to Krishna?
Both of those motives are acceptable. Both of those are progressive, and both of those are considered to be favorable for the execution of devotional service. So to some extent, you can't be artificial in spiritual life. Okay? So there'll be times where actually you may not feel so much positive inspiration to do something for your guru, but when you do it because it's the right thing to do, in a sense, it's even more loving, right? Because you didn't feel like doing it, but yeah, you know what? But I know it's the right thing to do, so I'm going to do it. That's still favorable. Sometimes you'll do it because you actually feel that sense of genuine appreciation for your guru, and that will be a catalyst for engaging that service. So in reality, what usually happens is that we're serving the spiritual master on the basis of a series of different motives. Sometimes you may have an association with your guru, and he may be very kind to you, very encouraging, and that may inspire you to serve him, you see? Other times the guru may chastise you, and you may even feel, oh, that was, ouch, that hurt, right? But that may be, it'll still be necessary and you'll still serve him. So all of those motives, as long as they're progressive and they're in line with our teachings, this is what I said earlier, because all of those motives are given in Guru Sadhu Shastra and they're all considered to be favorable. They're all part of our tradition. So sometimes it said you will serve him out of duty. Sometimes it said you will serve him out of affection and love, right? Sometimes it said you will serve him because he's a direct representative of Krishna, and by pleasing him, you're pleasing Krishna. So they are all bona fide catalysts for service. But the one other thing I'll add is we should also always try to cultivate a mood of service and a motive to serve the guru that's as favorable as possible. So although all those motives are acceptable and they're positive, we also want to understand how much the guru is pleasing Krishna, how much he's dear to Krishna, and to serve. And when we come to the transcendental platform, on the transcendental platform, one will know who their guru is in the spiritual world. You know, when we achieve prema, we'll know who our spiritual master is in the spiritual world. And one can even receive direct dictation from the spiritual master, even in this world. So I'm not sure, I just want to mention it because I think it's important. We're all friends here. If you hear, and I know that I think Jagannath Sharan was on that call. If you hear, for example, Giriraj Maharaj, again, when you're speaking about Tamal Krishna Maharaj, he spoke on Friday evening and he mentioned how he had an experience, he had a realization of Srila Prabhupada where he was able to take direct dictation from Prabhupada after Prabhupada had left the planet. So all of this is real. I mean, believe me, the spiritual, what Prabhupada said is absolutely true. The spiritual master, even when he's not physically present, he's there, you know? Some of us, our spiritual master is no longer on the planet, but we have association of our guru. We have association of our guru. As long as you are able to stay connected to him by proper service, he can reach out, he can serve, he can guide, it's incredible. The process works. That's 100% a fact. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
That answer your question, Shamasundar.
Most definitely. Thank you, Prue.
Thank you. Okay, I'll go to Sudhir Nitai, and then I'll go to, I think, Jagannath Sharan, then Deepa. So Sudhir Nitai, very well.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you for the Sangha today. Appreciate the topic. So my question was around, you mentioned about blocks or barriers in terms of being able to allow the transcendental sound vibration to come through. And I think if we know there is a block or barrier that either is present or, has become present, what are the ways that you would suggest to remove, or the steps that one can take to remove that block or barrier? I guess it's similar to the point that when one comes to Krishna consciousness, because you don't know nothing, it's easy to be like very humble. So you can easily hear. But then as you make more progress, then sometimes artificially there's a barrier that comes up. And I guess one way I was thinking is obviously to pray to Krishna to help remove that. But if you have any other suggestions.
Yeah, so it's a very good question. Thank you for that. I was thinking about this as well. It's a great topic, first of all, for people to really explore. So the first mistake that devotees make about blocks is that they hide it. That's the worst thing you can do. When you have a block or a barrier to progress, whatever you do, do not hide it. The first most important principle is to share it. And actually there's two sides to this. One is to fully embrace the fact that it's an issue, it's an obstacle that you have, right? Don't kind of put frills around it. It's not such a big deal, etc. Be like, you know what? I've got this weakness. There's in our teachings, it talks about weakness of heart, and people don't actually understand what that means. So I asked earlier this year, I asked one Prabhupada disciple, because it talks about different, in our scripture, it talks about weakness of heart and material desires. And I was trying to understand what exactly is the difference. So it was explained to me by one Prabhupada disciple earlier this year. So material desires are like specific material attachments. Weakness of heart is the underlying root of material desires. So it was explained to me that weakness of heart is the desire to enjoy separately from the Lord, right? So you have the principle, I've got material desires, and then you've got the asat trishna, the specific material desires that an individual has according to their conditioning. So weakness of heart is actually the fact that you want to enjoy the material world rather than serve Krishna. So anyone who's got material attachments, from the scriptural point of view, they're weak-hearted. You see, it's considered to be weak-hearted. So the first thing is to recognize, yeah, the fact that I've got these material attachments is actually a weakness. Not, oh, but you know what? It's not that bad, and other people have it as well. No. It's a weakness of heart. Now, you don't beat yourself up about it, but that first stage is humility, right? That first stage is humility. Then Krishna's very pleased by that, by the way. If someone, and Prabhupada writes about this, see, you see this even in our movement, right? So someone can't do something, and rather than just say, I struggle to do this, they make an entire philosophy out of it. It's not so bad. Prabhupada didn't expect everyone to follow all the 4 regulative principles. No, just say that I find it difficult not to follow it. That's fine. I mean, obviously, when I say fine, I mean, it's honest. But if you start then going into like, it's not a big deal really, then it's like, no, you've just really crossed the line now, right? Now it's offensive, you see? So the first thing is, I've got this weakness of heart. Then it's honest, but that often, I've seen this, that often takes a lot of humility on the part of people, because we're so insecure in Kali Yuga that even though we've got all of these failings, we still want to make out, but I'm still great, I'm just as good as everyone else. Yeah, and that's actually true though. That's the funny thing. You are as good as everyone else, not because you've got faults or weaknesses, but because you're loved by Krishna. So first stage is be honest about it. And you can then explore it. You can pray, which is what you mentioned. You can start to research about that particular topic. You can inquire from advanced devotees in confidence, right? Not that you have to put it on Facebook, but you can do all of those things. You can start to explore, how do I overcome that weakness? But because you didn't, see, when you deny that it's an issue, you become more entrenched in the anatta. But when you recognize, yeah, it's just an attachment I have, this is the funny thing. So I see for myself, right? I used to think that a certain order that my Guru Maharaj gave me, I used to think, yes, because I'm going to do something big for Krishna. I started to see over time that, yeah, you got an attachment, you're ambitious. And your spiritual master saw that, therefore he gave you a particular type of instruction, which will take your material attachment and uproot it by engaging it in Krishna's service. But it takes some humility to say, yeah, you've got this material ambition. So therefore your guru saw that, and you saw it's deep rooted. So therefore he's given you an opportunity to engage your material ambition in service of the Lord, to uproot it. Not because it makes you're very special because you've got a material ambition, you see, but it requires humility. That requires a certain maturity of consciousness. Otherwise, people will dress it up as something else. That's the point. No, I'm not going to say that. Okay, that's the point. So whatever it is, recognize it. Don't pretend it's something else. Don't do that. Recognize it for what it is. And then don't beat yourself up about it either. Speak about it. And oftentimes, very advanced devotees who may be acting as our Shiksha Gurus, they may just give us means by which we can engage that anatta. If it is something that can be engaged, they may just give us some means by which we can engage it in devotional service. and that devotional service. In the beginning, we'll do it mostly for ourselves and only really little for Krishna in consciousness. But as we engage it more and more, what happens is this. We end up doing it more and more for Krishna and less because we're attached to it materially. And in the pure state, we're just doing it purely for Krishna. I'll give you a very good example. I was speaking to a disciple of Radha Maharaj, and he told me that in the conversation he had with Radha Maharaj told him, he said, I never wanted to be famous. And it's true. You can actually see that. He's an introvert. Introverts, they get their energy by being by themselves, right? So you can understand, because people talk about going outside their comfort zone. If you see someone who's introverted and they're spending time with other people all the time, you may not know it because we project what we're like onto them, but that will be a real stretch. To do that all the time, you're either incredibly strong or, just very, very pure, because it's such a stretch. So I could see that him doing that, I saw what my spiritual master said. I was with my guru. We were in Detroit in 2004, and the class is actually online somewhere. It was myself. We were staying with my spiritual master. He was preaching in Detroit. It was myself. I believe Rajalila and Acaryas were there. Purusha Shukta, maybe Jambavati. And he'd just come from Toronto Rathayatra in 2004. And one of the things he said in that class, which is online, I had the recordings, I was in the room, but he talked about how he'd met with Radha Maharaj, and Radha Maharaj, being that transcendental personality that he is, one Ayurvedic doctor had told Radha Maharaj, he said, the way you're able to function is like, just the way you're able to function relative to his health at the time. Hopefully it's much better now, but relative to his health at the time, and this is 16 years ago, by the way, 16 years ago, the Ayurvedic doctor said to him, you must be existing on spiritual energy, right? So Radha Maharaj had told my spiritual master that. My spiritual master told a small group of us that when we were serving him in Detroit in 2004. So there's a lot that's going on. And the spiritual master, they can give a lot of blessings. They can help us to work through our anartas. And sometimes it may take time to work through certain things. Sometimes we work through them by dovetailing them, sometimes through knowledge, sometimes through higher association, sometimes through getting a higher taste. It's not one size fits all. That's why we always need, at every stage of our spiritual progress, we need personal association. You see, we need personal association, and we need to be open and honest in that personal association. And we need to be ready to get honest feedback from those people as well, and then we can actually progress. So you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, but be honest about it. Don't pretend it's something else. And then start to take those steps through hearing, reading, learning, prayer, inquiry from the right people. How can I move forward? And you may even find that sometimes they'll tell you that anatta, that doesn't go away very early. The anatta, the desire for pratishta. When my spiritual master was leaving the planet in 2005, I first heard this point. The desire for pratishta, the desire for fame, is one of the last anattas to leave. So the idea that somehow, it just goes now. There are some devotees, they don't want fame, but they do. Meaning that they're not conscious of the fact that they want fame, but if they become more advanced, they'll actually see you have a strong desire for fame. That's the funny thing about spiritual life. You can have loads of anartas and you may not even be conscious of them. But as you become purified, as we become purified and our heart becomes clearer, then we actually start to see, oh my God, this is in my heart. Now, the funny thing is, the more advanced the devotee is, you can see anartas in someone's heart that they can't see in their own heart. And the gurus are like that. They can tell. I know one Prabhupada disciple who's a guru actually, and he told me, because he has other gurus that he looks up to, and he told me that he asked 2 gurus for advice. And one of the gurus was my spiritual master, and the other guru was another spiritual master. And they both saw the same thing. And they both told him the same thing. And he told me, he said, your spiritual master, when he told, when he said, this guru told me, he said, when your spiritual master gave me the feedback, he was very blunt about it. And when the other spiritual master gave me this feedback, they pointed to the same thing that needed to be worked on, but the other spiritual master said it in a more soft way. You know, so your guru master was a bit more blunt, that you're like this, you need to work on this, you know. But that guru told me that feedback that he'd been given by these two different gurus, because as we progress, the anartas, or the cleansing process, let's say, becomes more subtle. So first, we let go of gross anartas, right? And that's enshrined in our 4 regulative principles. We first give up the gross anartas, but then we have to give up some more of the subtle anartas. And what happens is, as we become more purified, we can pick up more of the subtle and gross anartas that need to be cleared, because we've moved beyond that stage, so we can see when other people, oh, you got this attachment or that attachment. So it goes from the gross to the subtle. And sometimes, therefore, the thing that you see as an issue, it was always there, but now because you're more purified, now it becomes obvious, whereas before it was hidden. Okay. So those are some reflections on your points during the time. Does that answer your question, first of all?
It answers the question partly, but I guess it also answered another question, or a deeper question. But I was more specifically thinking about like hearing from someone as a specific block, right? So I feel there's a block now that's appeared from hearing from person A or person B that wasn't there before.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm conscious of that barrier, like I know it's there. So like, what are those steps? So specifically about hearing.
Okay, then it depends on why the barriers come up. Okay, so there are some reasons which can be legitimate, some which can be illegitimate. Okay, so what is the focal point of that inability to hear? And so actually there's a bit more to it. What is the focal point of the ability to of the inability to hear, and what is the necessity? In other words, if it's just that this particular devotee, I don't like their classes, I don't find them inspiring, and they're not in a particular relationship with me, right? They're not my guru, for example. Then you can hear from other gurus, or other devotees, okay? If it's something more specific and you're in a particular, let's say, formal relationship or important spiritual relationship, and you can't hear from that person, then one has to start to see and do an exploration as to why. Again, it's not one size fits all. It's why is it that I can't hear? If it's, for example, doubts, and not saying that you're in this situation, but I'm giving some examples. If one has doubts about the spiritual master, then one may approach the guru, one may approach one's senior God family members, one may even approach other devotees who are senior to us. You know, again, to be very honest, because I feel we're family, I know, yeah, I'll give you this example. So Chandramuli Maharaj told us that there was one senior, and you know, who preached a certain way, and he couldn't quite understand, why do they preach that way? Like, you know, why do they give so much emphasis to this and this and this? And so he approached there was one senior devotee who was his godbrother, and he couldn't understand why they preach a certain way. So he approached another one of his godbrothers about that devotee, and that godbrother of his explained, so this is why they preach a certain way. This is their situation, their background, their experiences, and therefore they tend to give this emphasis in their preaching. And it helped him to understand. Chandramuli Maharaj told a group of us that directly. You know, it was it was an intimate gathering, and he was explaining that particular point. So the doubts are like demons. So when we have doubts which are problematic and can be an issue, then we should address them if there's need to address them, right? So if it's a special relationship, if it's just like, I don't find this person's classes inspiring, then, you know, you don't have to listen to that particular person's classes. There's so many devotees, so many classes, so we can go where we find that there's taste and inspiration. But if it's a particular type of relationship and that relationship is required for our progress, then we may want to do some exploration about this is why I've got some concern or blockage from hearing from this person. It may even be also that that particular person may have been harsh to us, may have chastised us, you know, and therefore we had an issue. I know that again, when we were listening to Tamal Krishna Maharaj's disappearance, there was one disciple, I think it's Ekachakra, yeah, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj really chastised him in the beginning, and Ekachakra, which is a testimony to the training he received from Tamal Krishna Maharaj, he started to go to Tamal Krishna Maharaj's godbrothers and say, why is Maharaj so heavy, you know, like that. And I'll tell you, I remember being at ISKCON London, 1999, I believe it was 1999, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj gave a class. And I remember afterwards, one devotee was complaining, why is Maharaj so heavy? You know, and I was there and I heard him say, a guru shouldn't be that heavy, you know? Now, this is really important. The mood is really key, because for that devotee, he went a bit crazy. He went a bit crazy. I remember him very, very well. And he actually went a bit crazy soon after, you know, and I remember thinking that's like a warning, you know, if you don't understand something and you don't make a public declaration of it, but you have a submissive attitude and you want to understand and you go to the relevant sources to understand because you really want to understand for the sake of making progress, that's one thing. But if you don't understand and you have an insulting mood and you just kind of like, just want to say something insulting about a person, then you can get a very different response. You will get a very different response. So it's why, and if it's the case, I can't hear from this person, what's changed? What's caused that, right? Is it because they're not inspiring? Is it because you feel they say some things which are philosophically incorrect? In which case, let's have a discussion. It may be that you'll ask the person, Prabhu, you said this in class, but it seemed in the class that actually the scripture said this. So I was just trying to understand, because that happens a lot. And again, to the example I gave earlier, see, some devotees, they don't have a broad understanding of the teachings. And I see this a lot in this ISKCON, actually, if I'm honest. And it's like, yeah, Prabhupada said this, but he said this, but he said another 10 different things about the same point. So because they're not well versed in the scripture, they often think that there's only one answer. And then when you don't say the one answer that they're aware of, they think that you're deviating from the teachings, whereas actually, you know, there's 10 different answers. And the one that they gave is the one that Prabhupada said in this context, and that later on he changed his mind and said something different. If people are interested in this, I love the Matchless Memories series by Tamal Krishna Maharaj, because some of these points come up where Prabhupada said something. An example, Prabhupada, he drafted a letter to a devotee because he found that they were selling incense. The devotees at one point in the movement would sell the incense, and when they got enough money, they'd give people a book as well. And so it was reported to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said, this is not good. They should stop this practice. That day, Tamal Krishna Maharaj was coming to take over from that other devotee as Prabhupada's secretary, and he heard what Prabhupada was going to do. And he said to Prabhupada, I don't mind. You know, you're the guru. I don't mind sending this letter out. But I should let you know, Prabhupada, that this practice that their devotees are doing, they're making enough money to pay for the books, and the books are going out, etc., etc. And Prabhupada, he paused, and then he asked, "Are the books going out?" He said, "And are they making enough money to cover the cost of the books?" Tamal Krishna Maharaj told Prabhupada, "They're making enough to cover the cost of all the books and on top, and even more besides. And these are the numbers." And Prabhupada, he said, "Then therefore scrap the letter." Yeah, he had the letter cancelled. So Shiv Ram Maharaj, there was a class he gave in Harrow Jamming when Tamal Krishna Maharaj passed away. He said something in his tribute to Tamal Krishna Maharaj. He said he was one of the people in Prabhupada's, in ISKCON, who was so intelligent, he was able to understand why Prabhupada gave different instructions and sometimes contradictory instructions in different situations or circumstances and to different people. So there's often a backstory. Yeah, so those are some of the considerations to do in Nitai. Again, because it's a very broad question, it depends on why one is not able to hear from that particular person. But does that help at all?
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to go to Deepa, and I'm going to go to Ananga Sundari. Deepa, you had a question.
Hare Krishna, so nice to hear from you. But I think my question's been answered by your previous answer to the previous devotee. So the question was around what happens if you are engaging with someone who you don't find so inspiring. But in my personal experience, it's been worse than that. I found it quite jarring, which actually took me away from my devotional service. So I guess it's not probably related to the gurus, but people in the congregation. Like, how do you navigate the congregation so you are ensuring that you are supporting your devotional services and not moving in the opposite direction?
Thank you. So I'll say two things on this. The first is, and this is my spiritual master, and this is actually, my spiritual master mentioned this, but Prabhupada says this. What you do is you try as much as possible to go for the higher association. While being respectful to everyone, wherever possible, you try to go for the higher association. Now, the sub point is that the kind of, the assumption is that we know what the higher association is, okay? Yes. But you try your best based upon your understanding at the time and your sincere desire to come closer to Krishna. That's one point. The second point is that we don't go looking for trouble in spiritual life. You see, when there'll be times in our spiritual life where we'll be forced to associate with people that we don't necessarily vibe with, okay? Now, what happens in those cases for a sincere devotee is that you'll be trying the best that you can, and because you're trying the best that you can, and there's a certain lesson that you need to experience, Krishna will, based upon your sincerity, force you to associate with a certain type of association that you don't necessarily like, but it's good for you. It may be because we have to pay back some karma. It may be because we have to learn something from our experience with that particular person. It may be because we have a debt to that particular individual. It could be for a number of reasons. When you have to go through that, that will happen. Krishna will put you in a situation where you have no choice. You have to go through it. And it can happen because circumstances will force you, or it can happen because you want to leave that association, but your authorities or your guru will tell you, no, I want you to stay and do that service. Sometimes it happens through the guru, right? He's asked you to do a particular service with a particular person. You don't like it. You don't like that particular person, but you can't just up and go because your Guru Maharaj told you. And you may even tell your Guru Maharaj, you know, when I associate this person, they're like this and like this. And he tells you, I want you to just tolerate it. Just, you know, just carry on. So when it's something that you have to go through, and you're sincere, then the circumstances and or your authorities will keep you in that connection, even though you want to leave, right? And then you'll know this is something that's been ordained from higher authority. Then you should even more enthusiastically dive into that association with intelligence to learn whatever you need to learn from that association. I'll share with you something from my own experience because I'm preparing something on this. So I'm doing some classes and I want to do one called The Story of You. I did something about this for a group in South Africa, but I want to elaborate on this because it's incredible. You can learn. I was going to give an example. I may do this in the class. I saw in my own life that for a certain period, I constantly, and I remember even being at school, I remember I made this school newspaper. I always like to start new things, like pioneer. So when I was at secondary school, I started the school newspaper called the GMA. So secondary school was called George Mitchell. So in my lunch period, and we had these big old computers, you know, the really chunky computers. So in my lunch period, I started the school newspaper. And then I had a small team involved. And then what happened was, there were other people in the team. And even though I started the project and was in charge of the project, they wanted to control what happened and how it was done and so on. And I remember being called to a classroom during my lunch break by two teachers. And they were saying it very nicely. And they were basically making the point that, you know, Ed, Eddie, my name at the time, since it's your project, you should keep control of it. These other people shouldn't be deciding what happens in the project that you're in charge of, etc. And I understood now that looking back, I understood that Krishna had sent me people with strong personalities because there's a certain quality that he wanted me to imbibe. It wasn't an accident. Anyway, so I'm putting together this whole schema, framework, where you can look at your own life and you can look at the recurring type of association that comes into your life, especially the type that you don't like. And you can infer from that, what is it that Krishna is trying to tell me by this type of association? And we'll use a particular framework or structure. But the main point is that try to understand, what am I meant to be learning? Because sometimes you're around people you don't like because they have certain characteristics that you need to have a bit more. They may have it too much, which disturbs you, but that same characteristic in its balanced form may be something that Krishna wants you to imbibe. And unless you imbibe that characteristic, you'll constantly be sent people like that who rub you up the wrong way. And the moment you imbibe that characteristic, either they'll stop coming or you can handle them.
Yeah. Okay. So is one way of asking why you're attracted to that kind of person and what quality they have that you're also wanting to have?
It may be why I wouldn't say why you're attracted, because that's more your own choice to get into that association. But people, but more specifically, people who keep ending up in your life and cause you a bit of disturbance. Then the question is, why does Krishna keep sending these people into my life? And what is it about them that I'm meant to learn? What is it about them that I'm meant to learn? Is it a particular quality? Sometimes it's just that you're not meant to learn anything, but you have to pay back some karma, right? So it requires a bit of introspection. And I found it to be very useful to speak to other people to get more of that deep insight. So sometimes you may speak, why do you think, I often do this with devotees who are close to me. Why do you think I keep having that kind of association? I'm very clear as to why. It's incredible. And another thing that happens, it may apply to some people here more than others, because some of us may not be initiated. What's amazing, and I've seen this in my own life, sometimes the people who keep coming and the lesson that they're bringing is a lesson that you've been told directly from your mentors, from your gurus. I see that in my case. Certain things I was told directly by my spiritual master. The people who came into my life, it was directly a test. Guru Maharaj told me to be like this, and now these people are coming. If I've developed the quality that my spiritual master gave me, then I can handle being around these people, right? But if I've not developed if my Guru Maharaj told me you should be more like this, and if I don't, you see, there's two things. One is developing that quality that your guru told you, but it's developing it sufficiently so that now you can be around other people who are like this. And because you did what your Guru Maharaj told you with the right degree, to the right degree, then you've got no issue being around them. But if you didn't do what your Guru told you, and Guru doesn't mean necessarily your own spiritual master, it can be Shiksha Gurus as well. We may have Shiksha Gurus who told us, you know what, Prabhu, you need to be a bit more like this, right? Or you need to be careful about this. If we've imbibed the lesson to the right degree, so there's horizontal and vertical. Horizontal means you accept the lesson. Vertical means you accept the lesson to the right degree, to the right depth. Then when you're around those people, it's not an issue because you really learned the lesson. There's a whole structure, and we'll go through that framework in another class. There's a whole structure to this, and it mirrors Leela. I'll just give you a preview of what I'm going to deliver. The reason why people are so much into movies in the material world is because we're into Leela in the spiritual world, right? Again, the point I made earlier, everything in the material world is a perverted reflection of its pure form, right? People want to watch movies and dramas and so on. Why? Because in the spiritual world, there's this narrative that goes on with Krishna, his pastimes. That's the pure form. And we all have our own events that happen in our life, and they're happening for a reason, and they're filled with lessons. And if we can isolate exactly what the lesson is, if we can accept, okay, this is what I need to work on, and if we can imbibe it to the right degree, you see your life changes. Yeah, so that's what we're talking about, Deepa. Does that make some sense?
It does, thank you.
Thank you very much. Ananga Sundari, you had a question.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much for a wonderful class. My question really reflects, like, some devotees may not be initiated already or haven't actually thought about taking initiation. And obviously the verse talks about our only shelter of getting to the ultimate goal is through serving the spiritual master. And I've often had questions to myself, and I'm always kind of working this out. But could you, if you haven't thought about having a spiritual master or going down that route, could you render service to like a Shiksha Guru and have them feelings of awe and reverence towards Shiksha Gurus and still reach that ultimate goal without fully surrendering by taking initiation?
Very good question. So generally what will happen is this. If, as we serve a Shiksha Guru, if we serve them properly and they're qualified, we will develop faith. The whole process from Shraddha to Prema is actually an intensification and accumulation of faith. So yes, some faith is called Shraddha. When that faith becomes even more and intensified, it goes into Sadhu Sangha. When that faith becomes more and intensified, it goes from Sadhu Sangha to Bhajana Kriya. When it becomes more and intensified, it goes from Bhajana Kriya into Anatta Nivriti. When it becomes more and intensified, it gets to Nishta. More and intensified, Ruchi. More and intensified, Ashakti. More and intensified, Bhava. More and intensified, Prema. Well, Prema is full and fully intense, it's Prema. So in that journey, you can develop feelings of awe and reverence to a Shiksha Guru. But if you develop it properly, then at some point, you will actually become inspired to actually take initiation. Yep. So as long as you're on the planet and you're on that journey and you have proper Shiksha Gurus and you develop that feelings of awe and reverence and respect and service, that means you're following the process properly, it will naturally lead to, either through the advice of the Shiksha Guru, if they're a real Shiksha Guru, and or internally within the heart. It's usually a mixture of both. To some degree, both will happen. Then you actually feel a need to take formal shelter if it's being done properly. So it's not one or the other, it's that one leads to the other. You see? So for someone to say, I'm serving sincerely and seriously, I've got things of awe and reverence for my Shiksha Gurus, and they're bona fide Shiksha Gurus, and I'm serving them properly, and yet I've got no desire to take initiation, then it means there's something that's missing in that process. There's some lacking. Because if the Shiksha Gurus are proper, and if the person is sincere in their service, it will invoke at some point a desire to take formal initiation and shelter. Does that answer your question, Ananga Manjari?
Yes, thank you.
And that is necessary, by the way. It is necessary to take initiation to achieve pure love of Godhead.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Did anyone else have their hand up, a question? I think Jagannath Sharan, yes. So Jagannath Sharan, please.
Prabhu, thank you so much for today's session. You touched on this secret of spiritual life, which is to please the spiritual master. And then later you kind of also reflected on the second verse, which was talking about how we can take shelter of the lotus feet or develop attachment. And then you mentioned this point of community. Can you share something about how we can please the spiritual master by being part of a community? I'm just trying to kind of bring the two together.
It's a very good question. So the spiritual master does not work alone. He works in concert with the previous Acaryas, who the spiritual master may be more aware of the presence of the previous Acaryas than the disciples of the spiritual master due to his being more advanced. But he works. I wrote to my spiritual master about this actually, and I wrote this to him and he accepted it. I said to him, I can see that you're not working alone. I can see that what you're doing, you're working in cooperation with Srila Prabhupada and the previous Acaryas. I wrote that to him many years ago when he was on the planet. This is before he was diagnosed with cancer, actually. And he accepted it. And it's true. And I saw that with Tamal Krishna Maharaj as well. A bona fide spiritual master, even a bona fide devotee, they're not working alone. So there's two types of community. One type of community are unseen. Okay? The previous Acaryas, they're present in the movement. They're active in the movement. Prabhupada is most present in the movement, most active in the movement. And then also, we have those devotees who we can see. We have those devotees who we can see. So, because it's always a community affair. No one goes back to Godhead alone. And anyone who tries to go back to Godhead alone doesn't go back to Godhead. Because the fact that they're trying to go back to Godhead alone means that they've not understood the instructions of the spiritual master. Prabhupada writes in Nectar of Instruction, the whole purpose of the ISKCON movement is to give association. And you'll see, and Shiv Ramaraj elaborates on this in Shuddha Bhakti Chintamani, the more advanced that someone becomes, the more dependent they are on the association of devotees. They don't become less dependent. It's not like, oh, when I'm a beginner, I have to get help and support and guidance. But now I'm advanced, I don't need to ask anyone. I just do. I know everything. I know what to do. It doesn't work that way. You'll see the opposite. When people are neophyte, they want to do everything independently. But the more advanced the devotee becomes, the more that they're dependent. But that dependence is of a certain type. So there's three types of interaction. There's codependency, where it's unhealthy, where the person doesn't think for themselves and they have to be told everything, right? That's unhealthy. Then you have independence, where the person thinks that they know everything, they don't need to check anything, then they'll get taken out by Maya. What you're looking for is healthy interdependence. So you do everything you can to qualify yourself, and you still get blessings and guidance from others, you see? And again, I know Jagannath Sharan was on that call. I'm sure you remember when Giriraj Maharaj was talking about Tamal Krishna Maharaj, and you're saying that Tamal Krishna Maharaj, he himself, he feels dependent on his godbrothers. And I remember, because we used to serve Tamal Krishna Maharaj when he came to Cambridge to do his PhD, his PhD was on Prabhupada actually, and on Prabhupada's philosophical contribution to the Gaudiya Vaishnava line. And we used to serve him. We'd see his godbrothers come to Cambridge to visit him. I'd be in his classes where he was talking about how he spoke to his godbrothers and he's asking for their advice. So you don't become less dependent. You become more dependent on the community, but it's nuanced, meaning that you have the ability to evaluate properly how you interact with every devotee. And this is spoken of in 4th canto, Bhagavatam by Narada Muni. You know how to associate those people who are junior. You know how to associate and identify those people who are peers. You know how to associate and identify those people who are senior to you. So it makes the association and the community even sweeter, because you know exactly how to relate to each person. There's a hidden level. So you know how to associate with juniors, peers, and seniors, but you also know how to associate those people who think that they're junior but aren't. You know how to associate with those people who think that they're peers but are not peers. And you know how to associate those people who think that they're senior but they're not senior. You know, Bhaktivinoda Thakur talks about 2 levels. There's the social level and then there's the internal level, right? So socially, peers, juniors, seniors, and then in consciousness by internal qualification. But that's at a higher stage. My spiritual master told me once, he said, someone may be senior by position, but not necessarily senior in consciousness. he told me that. That's a whole other story. But yeah, so that's the point. You know how to associate with all the different levels, because you have that ability to see, okay, I know what's going on here. And you add, but the foundation is you're respectful to everyone. So no one is ever disrespected, but one understands those nuances as well and associates accordingly. Yeah. Does that answer that question?
Yes, Prabhu, thank you. I was just, again, something that Radhanath Swami reflected on one time with me was when I was helping with some service for one of his godbrothers, he really appreciated it, and he said something, and it came up somehow, he found out, and And then he's never said anything about any service done directly, but he mentioned that one point, and that struck me, like he appreciates when you serve the family, the community.
Absolutely. And it is like that because we don't go back to Godhead alone. The gurus, they're not, I've spoken to gurus, they're not happy when the disciple, it's a Kanishta mentality where it's my guru and I ignore everyone else. That's the definition of a Kanishta Adhikari. They respect guru and they respect the deities, and they do not know how to deal with devotees properly or with people properly. That's a defining characteristic of someone who's a Kanishta Adhikari. But we're not meant to stay on the Kanishta's platform. And I've heard this many times by Radhanath Swami, my spiritual master, and we see it in the example given by Prabhupada. What we're meant to try and do in ISKCON is create a family mood. So you don't disrespect your spiritual master because he is your father. And it's not that he's the same as everyone else, because he's taking more responsibility. So it's a special relationship. So it stays special, while at the same time, he's going to be, your father's naturally happy if you respect his brothers and sisters who are your aunts and uncles. So you can't say, I respect my father, but I'm rude to my aunts and uncles, because it means you don't understand the relationship your father has with your aunts and uncles. You see? I remember, and I know that you'll know about this, Jagannath Sharon, in terms of, because I know this is exemplified by Radhanath Maharaj in terms of his ranking of priority. I remember I was at the manor and my spiritual master was there, and I think he'd given a class, and there were people waiting to speak to him afterwards. And there were some newcomers as well. But at the same time, Janananda Maharaj was there. And Janananda Maharaj, my Guru Maharaj, they're god brothers. And my Guru Maharaj wanted to see him more. And what he told me is that, these other people who are new, I should speak to them. And I understood very clearly there's a hierarchy. So he gave first priority to his god brothers. You see? And I know that Radhanath Maharaj, I think, is very similar in that regard. He gave first priority to his god brothers. And then I think it was the disciples of other gurus. And then it was his disciples, like that. So it was a very different kind of weighting, because it's a family affair. So it wasn't like, you just get everything from your guru and you ignore everyone else. No, in a family, we're all looking after each other. And that's how it's meant to be. In the mentor-mentee relationship, it's the same thing. The only caveat, and this is a subtle but important caveat, the only caveat, and this applies more when we're younger, when you have a relationship with your father, you want to, and this is mentioned in our Shastra as well, and in our etiquette, when you take advice from other people, you follow it in the way that's in line with the overarching mood of your guru. You see, that way it maintains the integrity. So there's three categories. There's instructions which are directly in line with the mood of your guru, acceptable. There's directions which aren't in line with the mood of your guru, but they're not against the mood of your guru. So they're neutral. That's fine. But if your guru says go in this direction, and then the Shiksha guru tells you to do the opposite of what your guru has said, that type of instruction, you need to make sure you get clarification from your guru, or where necessary, you may think, okay, I can't do that because that opposes what my spiritual master told me to do. You see, that doesn't mean it's a bad instruction. It may also be in line with Guru Sadhu Shastra, but it's an emphasis which opposes the emphasis that you've been given by your spiritual master, right? So say, for example, let's say I have a guru who talks about loving Vaishnava relationships in the association of devotees. And then I get an instruction from another bona fide guru who says, forget about community, forget about relationships. That's all nonsense. You just do this one thing and don't worry about relationships and community. Ignore that. Don't do anything. Don't associate with any of the community. Then it's like, well, no, my guru told me to associate with the community. You've now given me an opposing instruction. So we would then clarify with the Shiksha guru, thank you for the instruction. I'm sure there's a context in which that may be appropriate, but because my spiritual master told me the opposite, how can I, it's got to be reconciled, right? So it's not that they're all equal, and it's not that one's good and everything else is rubbish. As long as they're in line with Guru Sadhu Shastra, they're all bona fide, but now it's contextual. How does it apply to me? Does it apply to me based upon the emphasis I was given by my spiritual master? right? So some things are in line, great. Some things are not in line, but they're not against, they're neutral, great, that's also fine. But it can't be that, you know, my Guru Maharaj told me to write, to translate Prabhupada's books, and then my Shiksha Guru is saying, don't translate any of Prabhupada's books, that's all Maya, just do something different. Then it's like, well, my Guru Maharaj told me to translate Prabhupada's books. So I can't, how do I accept the instruction not to translate Prabhupada's books when it was told to me by my spiritual master? Okay, but the essence is we all grow, and we're interdependent. We rely on each other, not just our guru alone. No, that's where we get into trouble. Thank you. Any other questions or comments before we close? I'm conscious that we've gone for some time, so first of all, thank you for staying the distance. It was quite a long presentation, but thank you very much for your time and your association. And yeah, we will carry on in our next session, looking at a different prayer from the previous Acharya, and we'll try and keep this format. We'll sing the prayers, we'll actually look at the translation of the prayers, and then we'll try and deep dive. But if you don't know these prayers, which we'll go through, please learn them, so that when you're in the morning program, you can draw more of the potency of the teachings by really understanding what you're saying, the mood behind it, the meaning behind it as well. Okay, thank you very much for your time. Hare Krishna.